Just a reminder that you're muted upon entry. So you'll have to unmute yourself if you want to speak. We're going to start in 5 minutes, but for now, here you go. Yeah. So
unmute, he said.
No, not yet. If you want to ask questions.
Avram, did you want them muted or unmuted?
So it's okay if they're unmuted now, but when we start, when I give the introduction, I'll remind everybody to mute themselves. And yeah, it'll just be easier while we're speaking. Hi, Harriet. Admit.
Is this music coming from us?
Yes.
Okay, let me fix it. It's very... Okay, let me change it.
It's okay, I've muted you, so don't worry.
Which brother of yours is that?
That's Yaakov, that's the middle one.
Okay.
He hasn't been so lucky in the hair department out of us three, unfortunately.
Bald brother, someone's gotta have... You know, when you have everything going for you, some things need to be taken away.
Well, but Avram, you all have the same impish look of your father.
That's true.
Right? I hope you heard what I just said.
Yeah, I did.
No, I know you heard. I hope he did. You can
All the
repeat it.
impish!
Hey, you all.
Shalom.
Hi,
Joel, you're muted, just letting you know.
I said, Shana Tova and Gmar Chatima Tova to everybody. To John.
Indeed.
In particular.
Yeah. Indeed.
I owe you a reply.
All of us.
John, I owe you a reply. I haven't replied to the last one.
Yoel, you still have a book of mine. So
I do.
Who's counting?
No. How many? One?
No. You listen. I'm going to show you something. Where is it? I think I have it around here. I thought I did.
Karen, do you have a book of John's?
Yoel,
No, she says no.
No, Yoel, keep it because I have a copy of it. In fact, I think I have it around here. I'm not sure where I put it. You know, whatchamacallit?
Yeah, the tzaddikim. The tzaddikim.
Yeah, 9.5 Mystics.
That's it, right.
Yeah, I have it over here. So you keep that copy because I know you can't find it anyway. So
Actually, I have a feeling I know where it is. Karen says that I do have one, at least one.
Okay. But keep it. It's a good... Zoe, are you still on? I saw Zoe's name before. She's read the book.
She's here, just muted.
Okay.
So we're having a lot of people and this is a great turnout so far. I'm just gonna ask everybody, if you haven't put or named if your username is user, please change it to your actual name.
And I trust all of you see Harriet Wallman, who's now in the center of the screen. Do you see Harriet? She's waving. Harriet has written a compendium of poems. I guess you could call them COVID-19 poems, right, Harriet?
I think so, yes.
Which I hope you will, about one a week or one every 5 or 6 days.
Yeah.
One a week. And I hope you'll publish at the, even before all this ends, actually.
I'm hoping to. They're intended in a rather lighthearted way to provide some encouragement to as many people as I can reach to deal with this pandemic with a positive attitude, and yet they're not without warning. The last one was a little heavier, as you saw, Rabbi.
Yeah.
And, but we're going to have to encourage one another to keep our heads during this period of time. And I took a few notes from what the rabbi said this morning, which I will incorporate in my own way next week, as she talked about how to accept the reality of what we're living through.
Indeed, indeed.
So thank you for mentioning that. And Rabbi Moscowitz gets his special copy every week. He can forward it to you if you're interested. I'll put you on my payroll, Rabbi.
I thought I was already on your payroll.
Well, you actually are, but you haven't seen a red set yet.
You keep it. Avram, I have.
You're so magnanimous today, John. You're telling me to keep my book. She can keep her 1 red cent. Wow.
Okay, I take it back, Yoel. I want the book back. The book Yoel and I are speaking of is called 9.5 Mystics by Herbert Weiner, and it's a kind of a tour through the 50s, 60s, 70s world of Jewish mystics by a Reform rabbi who calls himself the half mystic. It's very interesting. Avram, I'm ready anytime you are, unless you want to wait.
We have a good amount of participants. I'm just finishing one last thing, and then we can start. We have a couple more people coming in, so maybe if we wait 1 or 2 more minutes,
Yeah.
if everybody's okay with that. But
While you're waiting, I have to ask David. Yeah, go ahead, Avram.
No.
Okay,
You go right ahead.
Okay, just a question to David Wheel, who's down here in the corner. David, and David and I are both St. Louisans, so he's going to know a little bit about what I'm going to speak about this morning, at least some of the geography. But David, my real question is this: is Yadi sign another contract?
I haven't seen. They said that might have been his last game, which it won't be because they made the playoffs.
We're speaking about the great St. Louis Cardinals catcher, Yadier Molina, who is somewhere around 38 today. He's got a couple years left, maybe. And it's unclear whether he's going to sign again for the Cardinals. So pardon my my parochial interest here.
But they are in the playoffs.
David's the real fan, actually.
Okay, I think we can begin now. I'm going to do a brief introduction of myself, then maybe just kindly ask everybody, if you haven't, to please mute yourself, and just so there's no interruptions for the good rabbi here. And then afterwards, we will have a period for discussion. At which point you'll be able to ask Rabbi anything you'd like to ask him. I'll help moderate that so we know, we'll know, make sure everybody gets heard. And yeah, so my name is Avram Musafia. I am one of the directors from the board of directors at Holy Blossom. And I was asked to help host this, partially because I'm involved in the temple, but also because I have, and my family has, a great history with Rabbi Moscowitz. We came to Canada from the former Yugoslavia as refugees, and that was in 1992, and Rabbi Moscowitz really played a big role in helping my family integrate into Holy Blossom Temple. And I just remember him, really being there every step of the way growing up. And particularly one memory always stood out for me, which was around the time of my bar mitzvah. I had all these questions. I was questioning everything. I didn't want to do my bar mitzvah. I didn't know really, if I had a place in the temple, or if I really was Jewish or wanted to be Jewish, or I had all of these questions that I didn't really quite understand. And I was speaking with Rabbi Moscowitz, with my father one day when he came to visit. I think it was a weeknight or maybe a Sunday. And I told him, I'm like, I don't know how I want to live my life. And Rabbi Moscowitz said, well, the great thing about being Jewish is you can live your life however you want. You don't have to practice. You don't have to be involved. You don't have to do anything. But you'll always be welcome here, and you'll always be one of us. And I just thought, that was such a great answer to a young guy who doesn't really understand or doesn't know how he wants to live his life. And it was such also an empathetic answer from the rabbi, who really made me feel comfortable with being able to live my life. So that was one of my fondest memories, and kind of helped me, cement my dedication to Holy Blossom, which I have continued to be involved in since I was young. So Rabbi Moscowitz himself is a man really who needs no introduction, but he served at Holy Blossom since 1987, so since 1 year before I was born. And he was our senior rabbi from 2000 until 2014. And he's been Rabbi Emeritus since 2014. He's also the author of his 2015 book, Evolution of an Unorthodox Rabbi, which I'm sure everybody here has read cover to cover and hopefully has a signed copy of. And he's currently writing a memoir of his days as a radical youth, which I'd be excited to read, which takes place in the 70s in California. And, he continues being involved with Israel in various ways, including one of Israel's most unknown but most important colleges, the Ono Academic College, which is outside of Tel Aviv. I don't think I need to speak any more really about Rabbi Moscowitz. He can continue introducing himself, but like I said, he really needs no introduction. So.
Okay, Avram, thank you very much, and it's good to see everybody. I trust you're staying safe in this utterly crazy time, which, as I mentioned, Harriet is chronicling in her poetry. So I'm going to speak for not very long. I'm not sure, maybe 25 minutes, if that. And then I'll open it up to your questions. And you might say that here's a headline. What I'm talking about it to a degree is something of a beginning for me of a spiritual autobiography. So let me begin this way. I grew up in a Catholic town, St. Louis, Missouri, founded in the late 18th century by French Catholic explorers. It would be named in honor of King Louis IX, Saint Louis, as the 13th century king was known. You might have seen in the news a couple of months ago, where are you, David? David would have caught it for sure. David Wheel would have caught it from St. Louis. There was a controversy because there is a statue of King Louis IX in front of the St. Louis Art Museum, high up on a hill. And there was a demonstration against it by Muslims and Jews 6 or 8 years ago, as I recall, because Louis IX, this 13th century king, was something of an anti-Semite. Who knew? I didn't know that growing up, but apparently he was. So amidst many demonstrations, there was one against the namesake of my city. In any case, the French Catholics of the late 18th century were eventually joined by their Italian and Irish brethren, and together they gave the city its Catholic foundation and feel. And even as a child, St. Louis felt as beholden to Rome as anywhere, and I didn't mind it at all. In any event, others would join the Catholics there, the Germans, the Jews, African Americans, and so on, to make it their city as well. And you wouldn't know it today, but at the start of the 20th century, exactly when my paternal grandparents arrived there from Europe, St. Louis was prosperous and important. It was the fourth largest city in America, beginning of the 20th century. Today, it ranks something like number 50. In any case, it was here that I was born in 1951, here where I grew up in the 50s and 60s, when a good number of my classmates were from Catholic homes. I don't think it's an accident, let me put it out there like this, that my belief in God started in these Catholic surroundings. Let me be specific. I think I owe as much to the Catholic Church, specifically the pre-Vatican II Church, which is rooted in the non-rational theology shaped by late medieval Europe, as I owe my belief in God as much to that as to Judaism. And remember, and I'll speak about this briefly, the ambiance, pre-Vatican II, Mass, been there, many of you, no doubt, was that of Latin, mystery, and incense. It was, in some sense, another world. So this is the early 1960s. I'm 10, 11, 12 years old. And on a number of occasions, I accompanied a close boyhood friend from an Irish Catholic family who was grudgingly obliged to show up on a regular basis to the Immaculata Catholic Church, about a mile down the road from our home, a couple of blocks or so from his. He had to be there on Friday afternoons for Mass, and I would sometimes accompany my friend Craig when I'm now 10, 11, 12 years old, when I was spending the night at the Sullivan house. My experiences, and they probably weren't more than a half a dozen, although I'm not sure, each experience was magnified by a beauty and an awesomeness and a mystery that I had never been exposed to before, not in the Reformed temple in which I grew up, and for that matter, on very few occasions since. I found myself there, almost in an alternative universe. Maybe it was that of the Holy, although I didn't have any language like that at the time. However, I knew what I felt. And as mentioned, this was pre-Vatican II, or just on the cusp. So it's Latin, mystery, ancientness, tall and austere priests in flowing robes who spread incense around and offered God's salvation. Now, as a Jewish child, I knew not to take that salvation. I didn't, when my friend Craig kneeled for communion to take a wafer, I didn't. And each time the priests, and they're always young priests, right? They seemed to know that I wasn't Catholic. So they offered it to Craig, not to me. They smiled kindly, but they never offered, and I wouldn't have taken it anyway. In any case, I was entranced by it all, and I loved it all. And I'm convinced that my childhood forays into a venerable and dark church, it all got inside of me then. The whole experience, as I mentioned, was so different from everything else I'd known. So that once later on, once grown and curious, those childhood experiences in the Immaculata Catholic Church helped turn my own eyes toward my own religious tradition. And perhaps those visits to this place of the palpably sensual evoked other things as well, maybe most of all, a curiosity about God. In any case, the feelings of awe and gratitude that welled up inside of me in the church and toward the Catholic Church have never left me. It was radically different from anything I experienced in the temple. Now, permit me to move from St. Louis to the Greek islands, specifically to the island of Patmos, where I spent a memorable afternoon 4 decades ago, and one which left me tangentially but powerfully connected to the great Catholic theologian Thomas Merton. It was a day, really just an afternoon, that's all it was, which I came to believe subtly helped me to find a religious voice within, which eventually I would learn to speak without. So in late June of 1979, I met a man named Robert Lax, L-A-X. Anyone know the name by chance? I'd be very surprised if you do. Okay, but do you know the name Thomas Merton? Let me backtrack a little bit. Merton, who is Merton? Merton was born in 1915 in the New York area. A brilliant man, went to Columbia University, became a poet, an important poet. He was poet in residence, I think in Time magazine, I think maybe at the New Yorker, professor of literature, I think he grew up Protestant, and in his mid-20s or so had some kind of experience that led him to conversion to Catholicism. He then became one of the great authors of the 20th century. His spiritual biography called Seven Storey Mountain may be the most important spiritual biography of the 20th century. He wrote many other books as well, and was perhaps the most important Catholic intellectual / theologian of his time. He died young. He died in 1968, actually. In any case, back to Robert Lax, and I'll then tell you the connection between Lax, LAX, and Merton. So in June of '79, I meet Robert Lax at his modest home on Patmos. Patmos is one of the, I can never say the word, Dodecanese islands southeast of Athens. Symi, Patmos, Kos, Mykonos, Santorini, those are the Dodecanese. So I was then a 27-year-old rabbinical student, and you could say that I was in search of the satisfaction of an anchored identity, and matters of the spirit, that is to say what I believed, were only marginally on my mind. And about Bob Lax, Robert Lax, one of the interesting, if somewhat obscure spiritual figures of post-war times, I didn't know of him until several days prior to spending an afternoon with him at his island home of Patmos. Now, I should have known of Lax, or I could have. After all, he was the chief acolyte, if not interpreter, of the great Thomas Merton. They actually went to Columbia University together, and Merton, after he converted, moved to Kentucky, to an abbey, and lived most of the rest of his life in this abbey in rural Kentucky, where he wrote and was an important theologian. Lax was not just a chief interpreter and an acolyte of Merton, even though the same age. He was also a Jew, a converted Jew at that, hence all the more noteworthy. Now, why am I on Patmos? I was on a 2-week sailing trip through the Greek islands with my father and 4 family friends. In effect, it was 3 fathers, 2 fathers, 1 uncle, and 3 sons, all from St. Louis. David, if you're on, this is Adam Aronson and Josh Aronson, Jonathan Aronson, and so on. Each morning, we would sail toward a different island every day. We'd arrive in the afternoon at some point. These are charming, wonderful places, these islands. And we would amble around for a couple of hours, then head back to the boat to clean up before returning to shore for dinner. It was as beautiful as it sounds. I'm jealous of myself as I think about it now. A couple of days into the trip, we first heard the name Bob Lax. We learned that he'd been a Columbia University roommate of one of our shipmates in the late 1930s. The 2 men, Lax and our Adam Aronson, hadn't seen one another in nearly 40 years. This is 1979. They were classmates at Columbia in the 30s. Adam was very excited to see his friend Lax again. Adam, meanwhile, had become a successful banker. And Bob Lax, as I've said, it wasn't just any convert to Christianity. He was the leading disciple of Thomas Merton. So Adam was keen to see Lax again, and hence the inclusion of Patmos on our itinerary. And given the divergences, which were huge, Adam Aronson lived a big life in St. Louis. Bob Lax lived a very, how would you call it, contained life on Patmos. Given their divergences over the years, Lax had become the subject of our pre-dinner drinks and conversation on the boat, and then again on shore over dinner. Now, Patmos might well have been on our itinerary in any case. It's one of the more northerly situated islands among the Dodecanese and played a significant role in early Christian history. It's reputed to be the place of the vision and the recording of the book of Revelation in the New Testament. And today, Patmos is dotted with many small churches and most, if not all, of the Eastern Greek Orthodox Rite. We sailed into the harbor. Bob Lax, and who remembers communication 40 years ago? I have no idea how they coordinated, I guess a letter or maybe a phone call. I don't think Lax had a phone. Lax met us at the harbor. He was probably waiting there all morning. Friendly enough, somewhat reserved, showed us around the island, including the cave where John the Apostle is said to have received his revelations. Afterward, he served us a lunch and tea on the veranda at his place overlooking the harbor. It was Pacific and beautiful. I wanted to stay there, if not the rest of my life, then at least the rest of the summer. I was on my way to Israel that summer. And I suppose because I was studying to be a rabbi, Bob Lax paid me particular attention. He seemed pleased at first that I knew of Thomas Merton, but he grew less pleased when I gently pressed him about his own conversion. He's an apostate, a meshumad, as they say in Yiddish, right? Especially how he had gotten from being a Jew in New York to an ardent disciple of monastic spirituality in Kentucky, which is where Merton was, of course, before winding up on this out-of-the-way Aegean island, all the while becoming a Catholic, a poet, and something of a monk. And as much as I wanted to know about Lax, he didn't want to speak about any of it in any detail. However, before we left him, he asked two things of me. First, please, would you take as a gift my copy of Merton's 7-story Mountain, really, as I said, the spiritual biography of the 20th century, sold millions of copies, New York Times bestseller, even though the Times at first refused to put it on their list because, as they said, it's a religious book, can't do it. They were pressured. It was on the list for many, many weeks, I think months, actually. Would you take a copy of my copy of 7-Story Mountain, but you have to promise to read it? And second, would you, he said to me, would you please teach me something about Judaism that I can ponder afterwards? I was very pleased to do both. And whether what I taught him was then on my mind or I just came quickly in response to Lax's request, I don't remember. I do remember very vividly what I left Bob Lax with that day. It was the hopeful, if not brilliant, credo of the author of the Book of Lamentations, Chadesh Yemenu Kekedem, make new our days as of old. Of course, it would become included in the Torah service. So as we put the Torah back away in the ark, that's part of the liturgy, Chadesh Yemenu Kekedem, from Lamentations chapter 5. Now, I added to Bob Lax what I'd recently learned from my rabbinics professor, a man named Louis Barth, that even in the horrible aftermath of the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, this is the first destruction, 586 BCE, the unknown writer of the Book of Lamentations refused the temptation to plead to God for a return to the way things had been before the fall. No going back, particularly where history is concerned. Rather, the request by the author of Lamentations to God was to, quote, renew our days, that is, to restore and rejuvenate our spiritual lives as you had once done for our ancestors, so that we can be sustained. In other words, and I suggested this to Bob Lax as I had recently been taught by Louis Barth, history comes one time only, but the religious quest is ongoing and transcends particular circumstances. In short, history is just that, history, while religion, occupied as it is by memory and meaning, is uniquely sustaining for its adherents. And it's certainly been so for me, especially with regard to my childhood memories of religious experiences in a faith not my own. As I've said to you, I have no doubt that my experience at the Immaculata Catholic Church, as well as my memories of Mass later on when I would attend on occasion, Christmas Mass, set me on my quest that would eventually lead me to rabbinical school. All of which and more brings me to reflect today that my affinity for the Catholic Church, while generated by those childhood visits to Mass and one afternoon years later in Patmos, is very much linked to a personal belief that I would come to, inspired all those years by a faith that is not mine. Namely, what I slowly came to believe about God, and this is a theological landing, ostensibly the result of my own evolving intellectual and religious search, was nonetheless inspired by what I sensed as a child witness to that very physical and very mysterious faith experience at my friend's church. And I should say that this theological landing, which I'm going to name in a moment, is not just any theological landing place. Rather, given my ordination as a Reform rabbi, one which inculcated in me a modernist and non-literalist approach to Jewish texts, I still hold to, mine is a decidingly surprising place to land theologically. For about a decade and a half after meeting Bob Blacks, I eventually came, mid-90s or thereabouts, to believe in the traditional Jewish concept of Torah Sinai. That is, God gave the Torah to the Jews from Mount Sinai, as the book of Exodus describes. This is a reading of biblical revelation considered unalterably medieval, if not inexplicable, by most religious liberals, us. Yet, I had once experienced something which, while I could not name it, I couldn't let go of it. You know, you land where you land in life. After all, it had become increasingly apparent, at least to me, that the fundamentals at the heart of Jewish tradition, God is real, God has commanded his people, the Jews, it's either real or it's not. The rabbis have a great word for it, for what's fake. They call it plaster. Plaster is a good Greek word which means plaster. In other words, it's a cover that you put on something which covers up what's real inside, right? So to me, either this God is real or not. Either God has commanded his people or not. It's not somewhere in between. Let me parenthetically say, you can't measure matters of faith by the normal terms of evidence. Indeed, faith need bear little resemblance to what the world looks like. I had little clue about these kinds of, let's call them theological intricacies, more than 5 decades ago, as I watched the priests at the Immaculata Catholic Church work their magic. Now, in case I'm going to be misunderstood, let me be clear. The way Exodus 19 and 20 depicts the revelation is not necessarily what I'm talking about in specific. I'm talking about the idea of Torah, that God gave the Torah on Sinai. What our ancestors did when they wrote the Bible, and obviously human beings wrote the Bible, is to depict as best they could in their own words and their own circumstances a picture of what it might have looked like. But that picture doesn't mean it's actually what happened. It's just, you know, if you're a writer, and I'm looking at the array of faces, and several of you are writers, you know that you write to express something that's inside, but what's inside is not necessarily able to be actually captured. It's what poets probably do best. In any case, as I said, I didn't understand any of this early 1960s as I watched the priests at the Catholic Church work their magic. But their magic stayed with me, as most mysteries, or the best of mysteries, do, which is why once I was ensconced in Judaism as a mature man, I could not hold with a modernist evidenced faith, at least alone. because I understood that I'd once imbibed something indescribable at the church, the presence of something, God, let's say something real, powerful, hidden, but felt at the very heart of life. And I knew well enough, as I've said, at the church not to take communion, but I also knew how to take other things in, namely faith, curiosity, and God, to which I would eventually turn one day. Of course, when I'm 10 years old, I have no idea I'm going to turn back to that. But I did take those things in, faith, curiosity, God, mystery. And when I matured, I took those things in and tried to give some voice to them. So I have no doubt that there's a direct line from my childhood experience amongst the Catholics to my adult intellectual and spiritual maturation. And so let me conclude just by saying this. So all of this is why, to the extent that I've since developed what you might call, and we all have it after all, a spiritual voice, one which is heard both within and without, I remain grateful to the Catholic Church for however brief those moments were back when the world seemed so young. They evoked within me, eventually, a language which, once I could eventually speak it, helped me to know and teach what I'd come to believe about both God and the human spirit. So let me leave it there. And Avram, you can, I guess, unmute people, and you're welcome to jump in with questions or comments or.
So I've unmuted everybody. I'm sure everybody would like, or not everybody, but if you would like to say something, please either raise your hand and I'll try to get to you as quickly as possible. I'll make a note of everybody that's that wants to say something. And if you haven't turned on your video, please send a message in the chat. You can send a message in the chat box and I will get to you as soon as I can. Melville has elected to raise his hand in the chat.
I just to follow on what John said, at the age of 7, I was evacuated during the war to the south of Scotland, having been born in Glasgow. And every Sunday I went to a Presbyterian church. And I always say I'm a convert because I learned my Judaism at that Presbyterian church. There were no crosses, there were no things, it was all Old Testament. And therefore I can see where John's coming from, because my basic Judaism then started learning when I was 12 in order to do my bar mitzvah. But being brought up going every Sunday to a real Scottish Presbyterian church gave me my Judaism and my feeling of simplicity. Jesus was not a factor. God was all, an Old Testament and Psalms were what we learned.
Thank you, Mel.
You're welcome, John. Shana Tova.
And you as well.
Thank you.
Let's go next to Harriet, and then we'll go to Meyer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, not quite on topic, Avram, I'm so glad to have heard your story and the story of your family, because in the 90s, when you came to Canada, I was on the Immigration and Refugee Board, and I heard many claims from the former Yugoslavia. And I'm happy to say that once the powers that be realized that what was going on there was ethnic cleansing and not just a civil war, we granted refugee status to many, many, many people. And I'm proud to say that I was one of them that felt very strongly that we should admit people from there to our country. I'm glad you've settled and you've become part of our community. I'm very proud to know that I was not necessarily a part of your story, but a part of many stories. So I just wanted to say that because I
Thank
felt
you very
so,
much, Harriet.
so wonderful when you told that. Anyway, what I was going to say was I learned my Judaism at Holy Blossom Temple. And I learned to be a Jew here from the time I was 9 years old. And what's kind of interesting about it is, although I've always been a thoughtful person, I think, I did not have a proper book for services last night, but I did find a union prayer book that belonged to my mother and father. There was one for my father, one for my mother. In the prayer book last night were the tickets that we needed to come to temple for services. And it had my name, my sister's name, my mother's, father's names. There were 4 tickets that my mother had saved. But what was interesting was this book was totally different from what we're doing today. The prayers resembled it. I could follow the entire service, but it read from left to right. The Rabbi John, the rabbi was called minister, not rabbi. And so when that part was being read by the leader, it was the minister, not the rabbi. And it was a lot of English. There was lots of Hebrew too, but a lot of English. And the prayers were somewhat different. And one of the things I found interesting was that the prayer that talks about Rabbi Jacob, Isaac, etc., no reference to the women that we now have in our prayer now. Remember, we go from that to the women who made a contribution. So it was very sexist as well as everything else. But otherwise, it followed the service fairly well. And so I had to evolve in my acceptance of more traditional Judaism in our temple. And I really like it better than I did then. So I think it's been a progression that's positive, not negative. So I just wanted to say that.
Meyer.
Yes, I would like to say that listening to you today actually revealed what I felt about you since I arrived at Holy Blossom, and that's a sort of openness. You land where you land, but for a rabbi, I think it's very important because you give a sense of relativity, relative measures to what we are trying to achieve, to come closer to that religious sense. It's a sort of struggle always. And definitely for me, acquiring a new land, being immigrant, also meant to spiritually find my place where a land or the system of value that I have left sort of was burning in fire. And I'm enjoying this Yom Kippur, a book by Ari Shavit, My Promised Land, talking about Israel and the different ways how the Israel was formed, and particularly talking about Zionism. And you found that Zionism was actually executed by the socialists. And my background is a socialist, secular. So I will never forget what you told me when I told you. I sometimes I don't feel like I'm completely here. And you say, fake it until you make it. I don't know if you
Well, I want to say something. Look, yes. Nobody feels like they're completely there.
Can you hold on for a minute? I'm on Zoom.
Avram, what are we doing?
I just muted. Well,
so yeah, nobody's, and it is a journey, and what you just described is your personal journey to something that actually became your profession, but not only profession. It is that type of, the God does not. It's not met by prescription. And the religious may have their ways and their prayer books and all this, but at the end of the day, if you don't feel it, You don't have it. And
I'm
I have
not
to say, I acquired that. I like yesterday. I was listening to actually the radio 96.3, and both me and Slashina, we cried because that prayer was really powerful. And I don't
You're
know
listening to the song shul.
the song show. Yes.
Yeah, which was on the radio. Let me just say a word here, and that is, very few of us actually feel fully at home anywhere in the world, including in the religious world, sometimes more and sometimes less. When I was in university, my Jewish friends came from religious backgrounds, and they would go to shul, and I would be with them for dinner Friday night, but I wasn't interested in accompanying them to shul either for Kabbalat Shabbat or Shabbat morning. And it made me feel on the outside. So I went to see the Hillel rabbi, and I kind of lamented to him that I'm on the outside looking in, wanting to be in. And he knew that I was deeply in love with Israel, and I was already working on a senior thesis on Zionism. And so, in fact, I was spending many hours a day reading books on the history of the land of Israel and the Zionist revolution and so on. And he said to me, there are many doors into the house of Judaism. You are entering through your door, which is to say the intellectual and the historical. Others enter through their door. So there are many doors, and we all enter through a different door, or many of us do. It's all legitimate. So, let me just say one further word about Meyer, and then we'll move on to anyone else who has a comment or question. Meyer and his wife are the real heroes. They're the ones who took these three young boys out of the Balkans, out of Yugoslavia, went through the rigors of immigration. Harriet is right, Canada was terrific, but forged a new life in a new land and gave hope to the next generation. So the three Musafia boys, we're looking at one of them, Avram, but Yaakov and Simeon are somewhere in the background, I suspect. You and Slavka, you made a life here. The rest of us had it easy. We really did. Anyway, anybody else? Comments or questions?
Avram just got results today. He passed his bar exam.
Okay.
Mazel tov. Mazel tov.
Oh my God. Thank you for that.
You'll able.
We have Yoel. We have a question from Earl that was sent to me through the chat, and then we have Susan afterwards. So
Okay.
You want to go next?
So first of all, John, thank you. Every time I hear another story from you about your life, I see another layer, and I've known you for a long time in many ways. I'm curious, though. You said to Chadesha Menukikedem, to this fellow Lax. Did you ever dialogue with him after about that? About what that was meant to you and what it meant to him, if anything?
He was a man of few words. He was reserved. He wasn't overly warm. And so the answer is no. I said this as we were leaving, more or less on our way to the boat to take off for another island. I don't specifically remember his response. He was appreciative, to be sure, but what he thought about it, I don't know, and I never met him or corresponded with him again, so I don't know. Lax, I should say this, Lax is an important poet, and if you talk to any poet, they would surely know his name, not just in association with Merton, but for his own poetry. He stayed on Patmos for a long time, and I think in the year 2000, he came back to New York, and he ended up dying there and being buried somewhere in the New York area. I never was in contact with him again. But if you look him up, you'll find his stuff. Same with Thomas Merton. And I do recommend Merton's spiritual autobiography, Seven Story Mountain.
So just following up, Earl asked through text, through the chat, if you could clarify what Bob Lax was doing in Patmos.
Nobody quite knows. He was following the life of a monk, a monastic monk. He ended up in Patmos, as I recall. I'm trying to think. I met him in 1979. He ended up in Patmos, I believe, in the early 60s. He had been in New York. He had a position as a professor, or almost a professor, as I said, teaching literature and poetry, writing poetry, working for some august magazines. He went then to meet his friend Merton, who was also from Columbia University, went down to Kentucky. And eventually, and he was kind of a wanderer, as I understand, he ended up in Patmos and stayed there for most of the last 40 years or something like that of his life. He was a different kind of figure, very interesting guy.
Now on to Susan.
Firstly, Rabbi, it's lovely to see you again. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
I've always enjoyed your classes. I grew up in Montreal in the 50s when it was a very Catholic city, and I can absolutely relate to that spiritual feeling that you had when you went into a Catholic sacred space. I'm curious to know, as a young child, what kept you rooted to your Judaism, and not to have let your curiosity or impressionable state follow you down their path instead of ours?
That's a great question. It was the temple in which I grew up. It was a vapid, empty kind of place, very dry, as most Reformed temples were in those days. It was my home, and my parents' strong identification as Jews, and particularly with Israel. And I think I liked being outre, so I was very comfortable to be a Jew. I remember in the 5th grade or so when a Catholic friend, it was in the lunch line in the cafeteria, turned to me sort of out of nowhere and said, "Oh, you know, you killed Christ, don't you?" And I knew he had learned that from a sister the day before in catechism. And I knew not to take it very seriously. So I was never bothered by stuff like that. I felt very strong as a Jew, not as a religious Jew, but just as a Jew. So, Susan, I don't think it ever would have occurred to me to follow my friend Craig into the Catholic Church, in part because he didn't like it. He wasn't happy having to go there on a regular basis. And in part because it wasn't my world. My world was my parents and their home. And even if they weren't religious, my mother was religious, I suppose, but not observant. You know, you kind of follow your parental path to it, at least to a degree, or I did anyway. But Susan, I have to think more about it. It's a great question, and there's got to be
because many don't. You know, many who are so impressed at a young age, and who are seeking truths, do follow others. You know, I know so many young Jewish adults who have followed cult leaders for exactly that reason.
Yeah, I was never close to that. That wasn't me. But those cult leaders are very, including the Jewish ones, right?
For sure.
Zoe Klein, are you still on, by the way? I can't see Zoe. Okay. In any case, there is an article you should read on this. I mentioned Zoe because she and I were recently talking about this article. It's called Next Year in Jerusalem. It was in Rolling Stone magazine in the 80s, I think. The author was a woman named Ellen Willis, W-I-L-L-I-S. Ellen Willis's brother was wandering through Europe as a 20-year-old. This would have been in the early 70s, I think. Made his way to Israel and Jerusalem. Of course, Jerusalem, he goes to the wall. And you know what happened at the wall, especially in those days. For those of you who have been, There were representatives of different yeshivot who would see someone and say, do you need a meal? Come with us. And, you'd end up at the yeshiva. And some of them would end up becoming deeply religious. I highly recommend this story, Next Year in Jerusalem by Ellen Willis.
Okay.
In the chat from Michael, who's asking, can you explain why Wax converted? It wasn't so clear to him.
Why did Bob Lax convert?
Yes.
Well, in part it was the influence of Merton. Merton didn't grow up Catholic. He grew up, I think, Presbyterian, and he converted. It was part of a intellectual, spiritual search. And Lax converted about 3 or 4 years after Merton did, I think under the influence of Merton. But that's why I was pressing him on Patmos that afternoon. How did you get to be from a Jew in New York to a monk, a Catholic monk here in Patmos? I assumed there had to be some kind of internal, biographical, psychological aspect to this. And he didn't want to go there. So I don't have a full answer to his conversion. But it was a thorough and sincere conversion, and not so unusual.
I'm just looking around to see if we have any more questions. Yes, we have Bob here. Bob, I'm going to unmute you. Hi, Bob.
Hi. I once did a course at Toronto School of Theology, and it was about some form of Catholicism. And I had a conversation with a rabbi there, and I was impressed that he was so open to, all religion, I thought. And he made the comment to me, he said, well, I don't believe in God. And also this course might have been on Merton. And I think Thomas Merton would have said something similar, that I don't believe in God, I know God. Do you have a position on that as a rabbi? I was so impressed with that. Like on my spiritual path, that's like a big dot, that conversation I had with that rabbi. And Merton is also a big dot.
Well, Merton's comment is a profound one. He's suggesting, I think, that belief separates you from the experience. Knowledge, however, and remember that in Judaism, the word lada'at, to know, has an intimacy, even including a sexual intimacy, that emunah, belief, doesn't quite have. So whether the rabbi, it sounds like he was quoting Merton, was he? When Merton says, I don't so much believe as I know, that's a powerful statement. One day when I write this up, I will figure out how much I know God and how much I believe in God. And I do believe in God, but I don't have the language that some people have in order to express it. Does that mean that I know God? No, I don't. I never feel that particularly. I just feel a kind of a automatic, inchoate belief in God. I don't know if that answers your question, Bob.
But it's just curious. I very much myself enjoy people, and I know yourself that you kind of cross disciplines, and that's myself. I have a tendency to cross disciplines. But if I might say, this rabbi, and in these particular courses at Toronto School of Theology, if we're lay people and ministers, and they were for sort of curious, adventurous people, I'd say. So anyway, the rabbi went on to say that he had a very personal relationship with God, and that he saw with his shul is that some people have an imminent, he called it an imminent relationship with God. In other words, it's the God I feel. And he said, some people have an oral relationship with God, and I hear the word of God. And other people have what he called an omniscient relationship with God, and that is the God that I see. Mm-hmm. And so can you relate to that at all?
Look, we all have our own ways in the world, our own talents, our lack of talents. I would put it this way, personally. I read God, which is to say that my belief in God comes through the intellectual door. And it's not like I think about God every day, but when I read theology, I'm reading God is how I see it. So, but that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the difference between, was it the rabbi who explained the difference between the immanent and the other kinds of relationships to God?
Yeah, because he said the way that he sees his congregation is that he said some people, they want him to be up behind the pulpit and speaking kind of strongly and omnisciently, like powerfully.
Yeah.
And he said other people want to hear, are more interested in what he has to, what he has to say. And I think that would be intellectual. But he said fewer people, like when he went right out into the congregation, that really most people were in his congregation were uncomfortable with that because they wanted a greater distance from God, I thought.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And it does make sense. And what also makes sense, of course, is where you are. So on a beautiful Greek island, which is a historic island after all, I could feel and sense some things that I wouldn't necessarily feel in New York City or Toronto or St. Louis. I had a yearning, as I mentioned, to stay there. I understand totally how Lax got there and why he stayed. And it was very, very compelling. And I think your place sometimes determines your belief. What you sense about the world, what you want to know about the world, how you act in the world even, for that matter.
Okay, thank you.
Michael asks, he comments that, I love the way you said we can come to Judaism through many doors. Do you feel that that is unique to Reform Judaism?
No, it's unique to Judaism. I'm not sure I think any religious tradition has many ways to approach it. And that's just my own kind of paradigm for the fact that there are many doors to enter the tradition, because we're all different. Look, pre-modernity, I wouldn't have said that. There weren't many doors. There was really only the door of observance. But when things broke apart with modernity and we split off and had many different kinds of experiences, all divergent from one another, then you have to have a motto where you say, there are many doors to this house of the tradition. By the way, I may have stolen that, as I think about it, from David Hartman. David Hartman, the great rabbi, American, Montreal, Jerusalem, wrote a wonderful book called A Heart of Many Rooms. And I suspect I stole the metaphor, a tradition of many doors, from Hartman.
Harriet, you had 1 second. I just got to unmute you.
Got it. Okay. Is it okay?
Yeah.
A brief comment. I was raised in a Reform household. When I married, we continued to have a Reform household. We were observant in that all the Shabbat and holidays were all acknowledged. And the children all went to Holy Blossom Temple. They all had bar mitzvahs. We had 5, by the way. So there was a lot of diversity there. And of the children, 2 of them are noteworthy. One became ultra-Orthodox after a trip to Israel, but to the point where our practices were intolerable to him, although we maintained a relationship with him. Another one was influenced by the loose mores of the 70s and became an absolute non-believer to this very day. And he is with me to be nice to me. I mean, to acknowledge my beliefs, not to acknowledge his own. So there were so many influences during those years that people who grew up went in various directions. And even within a family. So you couldn't demand a certain kind of unity. At least that's what I found out. So I just thought I'd make that comment.
Thank you.
Just another quick one from Michael. He asks who the author was of Next Year in Jerusalem.
Her name is Ellen Willis, Willis. If you look up Ellen Willis, Next Year in Jerusalem, Rolling Stone, you'll find it. She wrote a number of things. One was, this essay is one of many essays in a book she wrote called, I think it was called Beginning to See the Light. Ellen Willis was a well-known feminist. She died, I think, in the last 10 years. She would, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, wrote for both Rolling Stone and particularly the Village Voice. Interesting person. Any other comments or questions? Yoel, is your hand up or no? No, okay. Okay, if there are no more comments or questions, I would just express the hope that all of us stay in safety and health, off the mean streets, and away from this intrepid and awful virus. Stay safe, be smart, inspire the people around you to do the same. We're the ones who spread this, after all. It's not spread by some, unknown entity. It's spread by human beings. It's up to us to contain it and stay safe and make sure other people are safe too, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Thank you. It's good to see everybody in Easy Fast.
Thank you.
Shana
Okay.
Tova to everyone.
Thank you.
And you too.
It was
Take care.
wonderful. Just wonderful. Thank you.
Be
so
well.
Best to all of you. Bob and Marlene, I didn't say hello, but hello.
Be
I like
well.
I like your beard. You look, by the way, like Robert Lax, I might say.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi to everybody. I can't see everybody, but
Oh, it's Francie. Okay.
Hi,
Just call
Francie.
back. Oh.
hi, Francie.
Hi.
Hi. Okay.
Hi, Bob, Marlene.
All right. Everybody take care.
An
Avram,
easy fast and a good year.
you too. Avram, thank you very much for all your help.
Avram,
Appreciate it.
thank you for sharing that. It was good.
You done it good.
Absolute pleasure, everyone. I'll keep it open as people are filtering out. And take care.
Norman Mogul, is that you there? I think it was.
Rob.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, John. Yes, that's who it is.
Okay, say hi to Susie.
Yeah, we just became actually members of the Holy Blossom this year.
Okay, I knew that your son was, right, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, my son Eli is a member, and he had the bar mitzvah there, the first one in the COVID universe.
And Susie grew
and Susie's here, and I'm going to try to see if she's going to say hello to you. Okay, hang on, please.
You grew up at Holy Blossom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Susie.
Susan Mogul. Oh my God.
Yes, yes.
You know who Susan Mogul is? She took from Mount Sinai. She was with us.
You remember that, Meir? Oh, so long ago.
Yes, I do. So nice to see you on this call. Shana Tova. Oh my
Shana
God.
Tova, Gemar Chatima Tova to you too.
To everybody. Stay
And
safe.
how is your whole family?
My family, good. Avram is sharing this session.
Very nice. Aren't you proud of him?
I am.
Very nice.
I'm so happy to see.
And the other two boys?
The other two boys are here. I mean, at home now, but they're good.
Right.
They're good. Growing
Good.
up, working.
Lovely. Lovely. So very, very best wishes to you all. I remember you so fondly.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everybody thinks of the Musafis fondly, that's for sure. Avram, thanks again. Everybody stay safe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, easy fast.
You will.
Take care. All right, bye.
Bye.